So our speaker today is going to be Stephanie Moon. Now, Stephanie is a marketing and publicity strategist, and from leading campaigns for the New York Times bestsellers, securing partnerships with brands like the San Francisco Public Library, as well as coverage of Oprah's coveted holiday favorite things list, Stephanie has the experience and expertise to empower authors to authentically market their books. Now, over the last 10 years working at traditional publishers, Stephanie noticed a trend that authors who had spent years researching and writing their own book did little to nothing to market their books. Now, Stephanie knew that she had to change this, and so she built her business around empowering authors to feel confident in sharing their story and their expertise. Now, on the weekends, you can find Stephanie tending her cut flower garden, taste testing hard kombuchas, or getting comfy on the sofa with a book. Stephanie, I am so excited to start today's conversation. But before we jump in, is there anything that you would like to share with our audience about your background, anything you feel like they should know before we kick off this conversation?
Hi, thanks for having me. No, I think that was like a great intro, and I'm really excited to be here.
Thank you so much. All right, so to get us started, let's see there we go. To get us started, I want to talk a little bit about what it takes for Asian American authors specifically to feel comfortable promoting themselves and their work. Let's talk first about, kind of what helped you to see the patterns of those Asian American authors that really got in the way of that promotion.
Yeah, so over the years, I've worked on hundreds of books. And first, there's been hardly any Asian American authors. There's probably been less than 10. So that's like very, very little. And what I really noticed and over my time is basically being a successful author, promoting your book, talking about yourself, doing self-promotion is basically like the opposite of what a lot of Asian Americans learn culturally or at home, or, kind of just their experience, So being a successful author is like talking about yourself all the time. Like, hey, I did this. Hey, I did this. I wrote this book. And that's like so opposite of how a lot of Asian Americans grow up here. We're taught to kind of like assimilate, do hard work, but like don't really call attention to yourself. And that is just really, really different. And so I really want to help Asian Americans, but also people of color get their story out, because there's so many stories to share.
I think that's absolutely wonderful. And, many moons ago, I actually worked in audiobook publishing, and it was really staggering to me to realize, how much of that self-promotion, not only is it really key to, especially if you're not, a Dan Brown or a Tom Clancy, or, if you're not one of those kind of like big name known authors, it's really difficult. And not only is it really like, kind of diametrically opposed to the writing process. It's a lot about inward and not like bragging about yourself.
Yes.
But you're right that when you layer on top of that cultural shift that is present in so many AAPI individuals, it can seem very, like even more difficult or more, kind of uncertain, right?
Yes, absolutely. Because I think that, one, you bring up a good point. Writing your book is so different than marketing your book. So writing your book, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, you're always like going inward. You're doing research, you're thinking, you're creating, you're outlining, etc. But marketing your book is like talking about what's the value of your book? Like, why should someone read your book? And then a lot of authors are like, well, because it's like a really great story. And I'm like, that's not good enough. You gotta be more clear about why somebody in your audience wants to buy your book, or why new people should join your audience so they can find out about your book. Yeah, so marketing and writing are two different things. And authors often either don't want to know or don't want to like realize like, oh, I have to market my book. It's literally part of your job.
Yeah, no. Yeah. And it's one of those things that I don't think people necessarily think about when they think like, well, maybe I'll write a book. There's a common misconception. I would think that, publishing houses handle a lot of that, but it's not like, you can't just leave it up to them, right?
Exactly. So I think also people think like, oh, if I've signed with like a big, huge publisher, they're gonna promote my book. And yes, if you are a Dan Brown or whoever, like a huge author, yes, like Brene Brown, you will get a ton of marketing, you'll get a ton of attention. But also your publisher is working on so many different books. Like for me, I never probably worked on less than 20 books a season. I've worked on up to like average was probably like 30 to 35 as like one person. So it's a lot. And there's like 2 seasons a year. So I'm working on like 50 to 60 books a year. It's like how much can like one person do? And like every department I worked at was like overworked and understaffed for whatever reason, it's not and so your marketing department is there as a resource, but they're looking to you to be like the expert in the topic plus the audience, because you've built your audience around the people that want to know what you're publishing, so even if you have like a big publisher like Penguin, they publish a ton of different books, so their audience could be there for a variety of different reasons, maybe not the type of book you're writing.
Oh my gosh, I did the quick math in my head while you were talking. That's literally like every author gets a day per month of your time. Like that's that many, that's crazy.
It's that though, because you're also working on multiple seasons at a time. There's like stuff you're doing with sales, there's brand stuff, there's, a bunch of other stuff. So it's like, I think marketing departments are great and there's so much they can do, but how authors can help themselves is really also doing a lot of the marketing themselves.
Yeah. Well, and it kind of reminds me of a lot of the conversations that we've been having for the last, couple days regarding some of the more broad cultural standards for many AAPI individuals, because there's this idea of it's not really about individuality, it's more about kind of not like the group mentality basically. And so if you're going to be like bragging or anything like that, it's, at least from my perspective, tends to be a lot of like relatives bragging about their relatives, parents about their kids, or it's more of that collectivism than the individuality. Did you see this is this let's say a stereotype that seemed fairly fairly common with the authors you were working with?
Yes, I would say authors in general are pretty humble. And then female authors are then a little bit more humble. And then Asian AAPI authors are even more humble. They want to, I feel like the general feeling is, I love my work so much. I've worked so hard on it. I would love anybody to read it. But then there's this just disconnect between feeling really comfortable talking about your book and then and writing it, and so it's that talking about your book that's really important that the AAPI community, I feel like, has to start to get better at or get more comfortable with, Yeah,
for sure. Okay, so when we're talking about the ways that you help authors to promote their own books, this is obviously drastically changed in the last 10 years. So I'm sure you've seen a huge 180 in the kinds of things that are kind of de rigueur now. What do you think is most important for authors to know when they're promoting their own work?
Definitely know your audience and definitely be building your platform, build your community. That is something that you cannot stop doing. So I think about it, if you have a book deal, you should be building your platform the whole time, from before you even have the deal all the way till the book launch, because one of your main goals is to bring new people to your community. And the only way to do that is to continue building your platform. And I think a lot of authors think, once I have that deal, my publisher will just take over. But like we talked about a few minutes ago, they can. And you're going to know your audience the best. What are their real problems? What really speaks to them? How can I really provide value? And how can they be invested in my journey to writing a book?
Yeah, of course. Now, when it comes to, kind of some of the ways that people have to market their books, there's things like social media marketing, there are tours that people do, there's readings they do, there's all kinds of stuff. Do you think that it is difficult to encourage this kind of, branching out, because there's so much promotion going on that you kind of have to shout to be heard above the rest of the noise. So do you think that that's something that lends itself to this difficulty, because these are people that don't really even want to like talk about their book unprompted, it's not people that are like, so anyway, I wrote a book. So do you think that adds an extra layer to it?
I think a lot of times it can feel like there's so many different things to do. And I think part of that is not having a strategy. So I think something like posting on social media is great and definitely probably part of your strategy, but it is not the strategy, because the social media is just like a tactic. So it's like really being sure you have a strategy to get from having a book deal to selling all your books. And that can be a lot of different things, but just like picking one and sticking with it.
Okay. Now, when we talk about, some of the ways that you try to help these authors, to improve their promotion or improve, book sales and that kind of thing, you talk about mindset shifts that need to be made. Can you give us a little more information on that?
Excuse me. So definitely. So mindset shifts, I think, are, just kind of reframing how you think about something. And so, for instance, like the ones I think that I see that the AAPI authors can make that would be really helpful are, that feeling of imposter syndrome. So, that shows up as being, oh my gosh, excuse me. That shows up as like, I'm not good enough, but you really are. Because, for instance, if you wrote a nonfiction book, you researched a bunch, you've outlined a bunch, you maybe are a professor, you have done all of this stuff that you really are qualified to talk about your book. It's just that inner critic telling you not to. Excuse me for the cough.
No worries, you're good. No, I think that's really, kind of brings up a really good point. Now, once you identify the areas where you want to have these mindset shifts, what do you think are some of the best ways to make these shifts? Like, I feel like a lot of people have trouble with like the first step. And then once you've tried, once you've started doing something, obviously you have to do it for, most people say 30 days to make it a habit. So
yeah.
What are some of the ways that people need to know to get started, as well as like stay the course to really, shift your mindset in a way that's going to benefit you?
So I definitely think consistency is one of them. So like another kind of thing that comes up a lot in the AAPI community is like the idea of being perfectionism. So it's like, you really want things to be like a certain way before you kind of release them out into the world. And that can be great because of course you don't want to put like awful work out there, but also no one is gonna not buy your book because like all your social media images are like exactly in the same filter or all have exactly the same font. Yes, it would be great if they were cohesive, but it's more important to be out there telling your story than waiting for like everything to look perfect. So, and kind of like one way to shift that is to have a plan, make a plan and stick to it. So like no matter what, because part of it is just like moving forward, because like the more you get used to talking about your book and promoting it, then the better and easier it'll be for you. So it's definitely consistency, but then also like thinking back and reflecting like, well, why do I not feel like I'm good enough to share this? Or why do I feel like nobody wants to hear me talk about this cookbook I wrote or, novel I wrote?
All right. So let's kind of keep moving this conversation forward. We've got about 15 minutes left. So if you have a question for Stephanie, please ask it. Send it into the chat on your screen there. So it'll be on the right-hand side. And let us know what let us know what you want to know. Let us know what you're thinking about this. Have you published a book? Are you an author? Maybe you're thinking about writing a book. I'm sure y'all have questions. So please feel free to share these in the chat. Sorry, pardon me for kind of going back and forth. I have my second monitor up so that I can keep an eye on the live chat as well. And y'all are killing it with this. Eric chimed in saying, absolutely agree on the attention and marketing aspect during upbringing and that kind of clash of cultures. And Alvina also said the cultural conditioning about bragging is very strong. Are there how do I put this? Like, are there like language changes or like small things like this that can help people get over that idea of like thinking about it as bragging?
I think kind of instead of bragging, you can think about it as serving. So like, let's say your novel is about how you grew up and you overcame this hardship. Telling your story is going to help somebody because you never know who is also going through the same thing and then also need something to see like, I can get through this, like somebody else, this has happened to somebody else. And that shift from thinking about like selling or promoting to serving or helping is a really big, useful one. It helps you think like, oh, okay, so I did this for a reason. So always also remembering your why. Why did you want to write this book? Because writing a book is also not easy. It takes a ton of time, a ton of hours, and a ton of dedication. So what kind of put you there in the first place? So remembering that when you feel like you're bragging.
Yeah, okay. We did have a question that came in the chat from Alvina saying, how do you reach out to get support? So I think this is an interesting question. Like when it comes to, let's say like finding a community or something like that, like if you're looking for kind of that like groundswell of support, where do you recommend that people start looking to really find the people they need to reach?
Definitely your community. So part of being a really successful author is knowing who you wrote your book for and why you wrote it. So connecting with these people to see like, what do they want to learn and how can you help them? And it's really about kind of marketing. The way I like to kind of like teach it is marketing is relationship building. It's relational. So you should be trying to get to know people. It's not always transactional. It shouldn't always be pre-order my book, buy my book, leave a review. Like there's a time and place for that. And you definitely have to do that. But most of your content and your outreach and your community building is really about like creating relationships. So finding out like, oh, you know, what's happening kind of in your world? How can I help? Or like, what are you interested in learning about next? Or what about my story is like confusing? Or, you know, I think just really asking the question and then listening.
Excellent. Okay. Now we did have a follow-up question come in from Lila or Leela. I'm not sure how they pronounce it, but this question was really good. They asked, can you give examples of some strategies to sell books or associated tactics? So let's go like high level. Let's talk about like, if you have a book coming out, you talked about how like, social media marketing is one of the tactics, but it's not your entire strategy. Are there like certain pillars that kind of are pretty universal across genres, that kind of thing? Or is it really more on a case-by-case basis?
I would say every book is different, which is not helpful. So I feel like the main ways that people sell books are media, like kind of speaking, and then your community. So your community, kind of like the stat, like the benchmark stat is like 2 to 5% of your social media or whatever your platform is will buy your book. So if you have 100 people, 5 people will buy your book. So it's not like a ton. And then why people like media. So it's about how media can drive sales is lots of people who read certain types of media love to buy books. So it's about being on the right type of media. Stuff like the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, NPR, Oprah when she had her magazine, you know, there's a few other like very specific outlets that can kind of do that. So it's about really getting your name out there, but that and really giving them a way to follow you and a reason to want to follow you, because also your marketing doesn't end the day your book comes out. You can market it forever, or not, I mean, you know, for like many years to come.
Yes. Ooh, I like that. Okay. So we're having really great chiming in here. Alvina said that they think that another way this shows up is in ways that like people kind of prevent themselves from finishing a book. Like, why would anyone want to read this? Or no one will want to read something for this tiny niche. And I think I mean, honestly, I think those are concerns shared by a lot of authors. But yeah, I mean, when you put that and layer it on top of, you know, the cultural upbringing that these people are bringing to the work, I mean, that's like a 1-2 punch, right? That's hard to try and like shift and get around. Have you had situations where like you just could not get someone to understand or to make that shift for themselves? They were just never going to be comfortable with it?
Not so much not finishing their book, but definitely not promoting their book. So I think I've run into authors, and not just like AAPI authors, but just like people are like, oh, I posted about my book like 2 times. Why doesn't anybody want to order it? And I'm like, nobody saw it. You know, like 2 posts on whatever your social media platform is not enough. The way that people use social media, I would say, especially in the last like 3 years, has really changed. The amount that people are scrolling, where they're scrolling, what they're doing when they're scrolling is like, they're like barely paying attention. So you need to hit them a lot of times with the same message in order to get them to kind of know what you're doing. And I think even a lot of authors with bigger platforms, a lot of their audience still doesn't know that they wrote a book.
Oh yeah, of course. And honestly, there's so much about the publishing industry that's still, kind of shrouded in mystery for a lot of people if you haven't either worked in it or tried to publish. Like it's truly baffling. Like, I mean, I remember finding out, and again, I worked in audiobook publishing for like 2.5 years. I didn't really find out until last year, 2 years ago, that the pre-order on books is like how a lot of reviews and stuff are generated first. You don't get traction if people don't pre-order the book. And I think of all the times over the years that, granted, I'm old enough to remember going to bookstores to buy the books as opposed to ordering them online. But like, I can think back to times where I was eagerly awaiting a book to be published, but I never thought about pre-ordering the book. I never thought, about doing, I had no idea that was something that could positively impact the author, and if I'm going to buy it anyway, might as well pre-order.
So I think,
do you think, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, so I think pre-ordering is so like, for the general public, it's kind of like a hard idea to grasp, because it's basically like, oh, okay, so you want me to pre-order this book that's not coming out for 3 months. And a lot of authors will offer like an incentive. So maybe you can get a gift, or you can get a class, or you can get a download, or you can get something, or sometimes you get nothing. And then you're just supposed to wait, and a lot of people forget. So I think they're just like, well, why would I order it now when I can just order it on the day or whenever later it's available? And so then the backstory behind that, which you kind of mentioned, is basically like that pre-order number is showing retailers like Amazon or like independent booksellers or Target, like, oh, people are interested in this book. And that's really like a huge signal for sales plus retailers. And also, this is like so into the weeds, but like the amount of pre-orders that a book gets can also determine like how quickly the publisher is going to reprint, how quickly they're going to, mostly reprint, or if they have the power to change it, like print originally. So pre-orders are really important in the publishing world, but I think trying to convey that importance outside, I don't think we've done a good job yet, or consumers don't get that idea.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yes. We're getting a bunch more comments in the thread. Dr. Angela Peterson had said, I share my story as a survivor's guide. That helps me feel better and is a way to pull in listeners or readers. And I think that goes straight to what you were saying, make it more about service and less about you and what you can do for other people.
Yes. It's about helping somebody, because I don't think that many authors like spend the time on this huge project just like as a vanity. It's like because they really, they really want to help somebody. It's a long process. And I think, writing the book, especially if you're writing a memoir or something about your journey, is really you really got to dig deep, because you're being so vulnerable to share your story, all these hardships, all these like moments. So I think just in that promotion, just really think about like, why did I do this? Who did I think I was going to help with this?
Oh, of course. Yeah. Eric is chiming in saying, I really like this discussion because the conversation isn't just helpful to authors, but creatives in general. I have a friend who is pursuing becoming an artist, and I see so many parallels for what she's done in regards to marketing, developing a relationship with her audience, and so much more. Now, to bring us back around to, the overarching theme of the summit, what do you think that people should be doing to help support Asian authors better?
Definitely pre-ordering and then buying their book, sharing these books with their community, like requesting these books from the library, or asking, like if you have kids, asking your school librarian or your teachers, like, do you guys have, diverse books? Because also, as a mom, my son is 4, I can see like the difference, what a difference books make. And, he doesn't get to see a lot of like characters that look like him in books. And that to me is sad. Like, what is that kind of saying to him when all the characters just do not look like him? And books are so important to kind of open kids' eyes, basically.
Oh, of course. I mean, it gives you this window into a completely other world. And sometimes that world is made up and it's completely, like light years or eons away. Sometimes that world is very technical and you're trying to learn something from it. But other times that world is inside somebody else's head. Like, honestly, I can't tell you how much I love movies, but I vastly prefer movies over books, because you really get to step into that life of that other person. And there's no visual component to it, generally speaking. So like you don't have to come in with your perceived biases about anything there, because you get to create what, the imagery that you associate with it in your own mind. So I cannot agree with you strongly enough, that especially even for little children, like there's so many books and stuff that kids are exposed to before they're like actually literate, that you need to have that representation. It needs to start early. People need to see themselves reflected, or it creates a lot of problems in like self-identity and stuff later on.
Yes. And I also think for like other kids who are not of that, like who are not AAPI, you need to see AAPI people like in your world. I think it can go both ways, seeing yourself represented, but then also seeing people that are like different than you represented in books, I think is also super important.
Oh yeah, 100%. Now we only have a minute left, but I want to say one thing before we go. One of the topics we wanted to talk about was representation in publishing. Now, obviously, reading books by Asian authors and Pacific Islander authors is great. What do you think needs to change within publishing to really up that representation? Do you think it's up to publishers for staffing and those kinds of things, or do you think it's more of a front of house issue?
I think it's a mix of both. Having more AAPI editors, I feel like there's very, very few. Plus people in like that work at the house in general, but then also I think for AAPI people in general to feel ready or really want to share their story. They have to kind of feel that they're ready to open up and that there's like an audience for them, and to know that their story is worthy of sharing. I mean, it is, but they need to kind of like feel that and do the work to know that.
Yeah, absolutely. We are going to be going into a pre-recorded chat right now, but to round us out for the end of the day, Stephanie, where can our listeners and our attendees connect with you? Where can they follow what you're up to, help you out in, where should we lead them?
Yeah. So the best place is either my website, which is stephmoonco.com, or my Instagram, which is, you can find me, my handle, I guess, is stephmoonco. So I look forward to connecting and would love to continue this conversation. I could talk all day about this.
Yes. Love it. I'm running up in the chat, letting people know we'll be posting the full recording. But Stephanie, I just want to say thank you so much for spending this time with me. It was really, really wonderful to get to talk to you today.
Yes. Thank you so much, Megan. Thank you to Power to Fly. Have a good one.
You too. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.